Là, Canada? C'est le cours du suivi à Canada.
Les étudiants sont venus ici à la maison. C'était des Canadiens qui avaient...
Hey, Klaus.
Bonjour, Philippe. I'm sorry, but you know they came all the way to California to listen to your talk.
Oh my goodness.
California.
Yeah. A lot of pressure.
So if you were planning to make bad jokes about California, be
I
careful.
will cut those out, yeah.
C'est bon? On a tout le monde?
Oui.
Big crowd.
Bonjour tout le monde. Hi everyone. Aujourd'hui, je suis vraiment content d'accueillir Dr. Zelenski qui va nous parler de, comme vous pouvez voir, la connexion avec la nature et le bonheur. La plupart d'entre nous, on travaille dans le milieu de la forêt, de la nature. Ça nous rend heureux, mais on ne sait pas pourquoi. So, hopefully, today, Dr. Zelenski will be able to explain us why we are so happy when we work in the forest. And Dr. Zelenski has made his master's degree in psychology in Michigan. It's PhD in the Washington University in St. Louis, and he is now at Carlton University in Ottawa. So we are very pleased to welcome you and give you the place.
Thank you so much. It's really lovely to be here. I haven't ever been here before, and so far I'm really enjoying it. I'm getting to see this wonderful facility that you have. Here's a picture of where I come from. We're in the middle of the city, but we have a little bit of nature and greenery, at least from this angle. These are, I guess my news is getting a little bit dated, but there was this big study that came out that made it into a lot of the press. So people who live in small towns and rural areas are happier than everyone else, researchers say. Sorry, city dwellers, Canadians are happier living in small towns. Or the sun, this is not so sunny, people more miserable in cities. And this comes from this very well done social science Statistics Canada data where they broke down very small areas of the country. And they found that even though people in rural areas tend to have lower income, they are more socially connected. There are some good things about living here. What they didn't mention, though, is nature. And there are lots of reasons to think that this might be part of the reason that people in smaller towns might be happier. So in a nutshell, what I want to talk to you, maybe persuade you of today, is that when people are exposed to nature, as well as their subjective sense of connection with nature, that these are associated with well-being, so happiness and other indicators of positive mental health. And also there are more and more hints that when we're exposed to nature or we feel connected with nature, we're also better people, we're more cooperative, we're more pro-social, we get along better, and this may or may not be part of why nature and connecting with nature seems to make us behave in more sustainable ways too. And so putting all this together, I guess what I've been working on, what I think is true, but always testing out, trying to collect more evidence, that nature might provide this happy path to healthier or more sustainable communities. The why questions are hard, so I'll kind of wave my hands at some theories at the beginning, and then we'll see how well the data fit with them. But I think one of the central ones, at least in psychology, that people refer back to is, well, this is the sociobiologist E.O. Wilson came up with the biophilia hypothesis, and he draws on humans' evolutionary past, the notion that we evolved in environments that were natural, that were not big cities, and that we probably have evolved some preferences about the natural spaces we find ourselves in. So he thought people had this innate need that we were drawn to life-giving aspects of nature, and that this is deep inside of us. And even if we live in the middle of a city, it's still there. This has been developed by psychologists in other more specific ways. They often refer back to this idea, like, because of evolution, because of our history, nature might be good for us, both in cognitive ways, ways that help us think, and also emotional ways, stress. So this attention restoration theory says that when you focus your attention too much, on a computer screen or walking down a city street, there are buses, there are people, there are signs, they're all demanding your attention, it becomes fatigued. Whereas natural spaces, you could have this in an urban space too, a temple, a spa, but natural spaces are good at having the right amount of information, or perhaps the amount of information that human beings evolved to be comfortable with. There are birds, there are plants, there are things that are interesting, so you're not bored, but not so much that you must look at them and they demand your attention, unless there's a bear chasing you. But this is good to restore our cognitive fatigue and resources. There are similar ideas about stress. So natural environments, on balance, again, not the bear, but overall tend to help us recover from stress, whereas many of our modern environments induced stress. Well, what is the suggested evidence? I mean, I'm going to talk today a lot about some of the benefits of nature that we find. So to the extent that nature does seem to facilitate health and happiness, that's broadly consistent with these ideas. One study I like that suggests there might be a need here, that when people are deprived of nature, they seek it out. It compared office workers who had windows to those who don't. And it was the people with no windows who were more likely to put in pictures of nature or plants to their workspace. So it suggests they might be compensating if they otherwise don't have it. And then there's this other line of research in psychology called biological preparedness. This idea that there are some things that you can make people afraid of very easily. Like spiders, and again the explanation is we've evolved, you can show this in non-human primates, evolved to be scared of things like spiders or snakes, these things that evolutionarily over long periods of time have been bad for us, whereas modern inventions that you could mishandle either one of these and be in trouble, it's hard to teach people that. And this makes another important point. There are some aspects of nature that perhaps we are not drawn to, that are threatening or that are disgusting. And I don't mean, as much as I say nature is great for us, I don't mean to suggest like every single element of nature is going to be healthy. But I am going to try to argue that nature is typically pleasant, right? Most of the natural environments, certainly most of the natural environments that we as modern human finds ourselves in, we're not under extreme threat. They are healthy and they are pleasant. Whereas we have really strong evidence for this biological preparedness on the negative things, I'm kind of arguing by analogy, we need more of this for the positive side of things, but I think it's there. This is some anecdotal evidence that they found a spider in these government buildings and they evacuated the whole place. So it's easy to scare people with spider. Why, I guess I want to talk a little bit, some of these are studies I've done, a lot of them are ones I haven't, just to try to, I don't think I need to convince people in this room, so maybe I'll go quickly, but just what is the evidence that nature is associated with well-being, with happiness? So there are the kinds of studies that are broad correlational. You look at people's well-being, you look at where they live, and what do you find? So those headlines I showed you at the very beginning fit into this. There was a big study of Canadian students, younger students, across 300 schools in Canada, and they measured the happiness of those students, and they also measured the amount of green space and blue space, so trees, waters around those schools. They found that the greener schools, the kids were happier. Okay? So we have a correlation there. There's a large study in the United Kingdom looking at where people live and even tracking them over time. And they found, again, even controlling for things like income, oftentimes wealthy neighborhoods have more trees, but statistically controlling for that, having trees was associated with the happiness of residents. This last study is not quite as directly on point, but the data set is amazing. The Gallup World Poll has, for the last 10 or 12 years, collected a representative sample of planet Earth. By that I mean they get about 1,000 people from every nation. They put it all together, so amazing data. They find that to the extent to which people perceive high environmental quality, good water quality, that their local environment is protected, these people tend to be happier too. It's not an objective measure of green space though. I was lucky to be kind of brought along on this project in the biology department at Carlton. Recently, a graduate student went out across the city, and she asked people how happy they were, how satisfied they were with their neighborhood, if they feel connected to nature. And she overlaid this with some data about green space and the Ottawa bird count. And she found that, kind of putting all of that together, the thing that emerged the strongest was that the diversity of bird species in Ottawa is associated with how satisfied people are with their neighborhoods. So if you're in a high bird neighborhood, you like it more, just down the road in Ottawa. There are also studies that look at individual moments in nature. So how do I feel right now, and where am I? Another great study from the UK, they asked people with a smartphone, how happy are you right now? And with a smartphone, they can also track via GPS exactly where you are. This study was interested in showing that people do not get a lot of nature. It was something like 4% of all the reports were in natural environments. But even controlling for, are you in leisure, are you working, across those things, these were the happiest moments. So when people were in green spaces, they rated themselves as happier than other spaces. A much smaller study, but interesting to me, this one tracked kids. They strapped a GPS on them too, followed them around for a couple days, and then they went back with Google Street View, and they tracked those routes, and they counted every green pixel. I mean, not by hand, they had a computer program that did this, of how these kids spent their time. And again, they found that spending more time in green space, kind of in this interesting, objectively coded way, was associated with happiness, with better mood.
Yeah. Do you want us to say a few comments while you talk, or you want us
I'm open to that.
I'm just wondering, with the study of the GPS, is it that people are more happy when they are in nature, or when they are more happy, they go to nature?
That's a great question, and in these studies, it's completely ambiguous. But you're anticipating my next slide, where we do experiments to try to get at this. Yeah, but that's entirely reasonable explanation for everything I've showed you so far. Yeah, this one says taking a step in that direction. We've done some studies in Ottawa where we begin by randomly assigning people to see either some photos of Ottawa's local green spaces, parks, the canal, or others see a series of photos of Ottawa's built spaces. We've tried to keep them nice, match color by using a candy store, use some nice architecture. What we find is that when we remind people of Ottawa's nice green spaces, they rate their satisfaction with the city higher than if we've just reminded them of some of Ottawa's nice built spaces. So it starts to suggest, there's an experimental manipulation. I don't think we've changed anybody's satisfaction, but it suggests that what makes Ottawa a nice place to live, perhaps in the minds of people, are these green spaces. More direct answer to your question, are these experiments where we put people in nature and we compare them to people who not been put in nature. And this happens a lot of ways. You can do it in carefully controlled ways in the lab and show people videos. A lot of studies lately have been taking people out on short walks. So at Carlton, we can take people out by the river, or most extreme comparison, we have all of our university buildings are connected by tunnels, so you can walk for 20 minutes without ever seeing the outdoors, so it's very nature deprived. And you find in a number of these places that people are happier after a 15-minute walk out in nearby nature compared to a walk indoors or sitting in an office. One of these studies even compared, they took a video of the nature walk and they had people watch that indoors, and being out in nature was better than just watching. I mean, probably intuitive. It's not just walking, so you can have people sit still inside or outside, and you still find that people are happier in nature. They've done this in Regina in the winter, down to like minus 20 degrees. This one surprises me a little bit, and the people sitting outside at minus 20 are still happier than the people who are sitting in the office, at least in Regina. They think they're tough out there. You find this with virtual representations of nature. Oftentimes, if you have good ones. So just one picture of a tree is probably not enough, but you have a nice nature video, compare it to an interesting documentary. Oftentimes, it's very easy to find examples of nature that make people happier than examples of built environments. All right, so here's an example. I mean, it would be not really a surprise that one of these is more pleasant than the other. So out along the river, it's lovely. This is very close by in distance, but inside, in the tunnels, they're a little grungy. And so you would think, why would anybody walk in these tunnels, right? But even on nice days, they are full of people. And so we did ask ourselves this question: why do people walk through the grungy tunnels when they could be outside in this nice nearby nature? Basically get to the same place. The why questions are hard. One way we got at this, though, is we thought, well, maybe people don't really realize how much better it is to be out in nature in their day-to-day life. There's this whole area of research in psychology that they call affective forecasting. How do people predict their emotions? But the idea that we often do the things that we think will make us happy, but we're not always entirely accurate about what will make us happy or how much. And so we asked some, these are students, to predict. We told them we're going to walk along the river, or we're going to walk through the tunnels to the athletics building. How do you think you'll feel at the end of this walk? Right? And people, oh, I have a laser here. People in nature did think it would be a little bit better than walking indoors. But when they actually did it, we asked them afterwards, the difference is much bigger. So it's better to walk outside, it's less good to walk inside. And so people seem to underestimate how good a short nature walk is. And so that's why I always like to emphasize this and say, even if you don't think it'll make you happy, go outside in nature. Question in the back, and then I will come to you. Yeah.
How do you quantify the happiness?
Yeah, that's a great question. In this study, it's a self-report of 10 emotion adjectives. So do you feel happy? Do you feel enthusiastic? Do you feel lively? Do you feel cheerful? Rated on from not at all to very much, and we averaged those together. I'm showing you the positive emotions. We ask about some unpleasant emotions too. We ask about people's sense of feeling alive and vital, and these all kind of track in a conceptually similar way. Yeah. Yes?
Just an idea, because I have this experience myself. You're in a meeting, and it's very nice outside, so you have a break.
Mm-hmm.
Then sometimes I feel if I go outside, then when I go back in the meeting, I'm less happy.
Oh, yeah,
because
yeah.
I said I could have been there. So if I at least don't go outside,
yeah,
I am maybe less happy, but the decline is not as much. I'm wondering if this could not be the fact that if you go outside and then you have to go back in class, then
the contrast makes it worse.
I don't know.
That's a good question. I don't know the answer, but that sounds plausible. I guess that would lead to different advice. Like,
exactly.
You should learn the answer. Don't go outside. You ruin the rest of your day. It's not the message I've been. But yeah. Did you have a question too?
Maybe for a short, like if it's only 5 minutes, not enough. But if you go for 30 minutes, an hour, then it's, I
You
don't
can
know.
maybe restore yourself. The timing, I agree, the timing could be important too. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, like, if you, in some of these experiments, control for the difference between indoors being a work activity and outdoor computer. So for
Yeah.
walks, it's like going somewhere.
Yeah.
The destination is work.
Yeah, in these studies.
The question.
Oh yeah, sorry. The idea is, you know, our outdoor experience is maybe a break or leisure, and your indoor experience is more likely to be work or seen as work. Yeah. Like in studies like this, people show up for an experiment and we tell them this is what you're doing and this is the task. So I think it's pretty balanced. In those GPS studies, you can kind of ask people, is it leisure, is it work, and statistically control, but that is a little bit imperfect. And you're right that oftentimes when people think of their nature experiences, it is a sense of a break or getting away. And so if you just ask people about their built experiences and their nature experiences, you're absolutely right that that difference emerges, and that can be part of what makes them nice. If you went to a quiet room and stopped working, you probably get some restoration too. Okay. Nature is good for you. It's not just your mood. It's not just feeling nice in the moment. I've talked to you about some of this theory of attention restoration, and so you find on cognitive tasks. So can you repeat long strings of number back? People do better on that after spending some time in nature, especially if you wear them out first. So we know that if people do attention-demanding tasks, they get worse at them. If you give them some time in nature compared to a built environment, the nature seems to be more restorative, seems to reduce that cognitive fatigue. There are some of these more suggestive than others. With creativity, there's a couple studies where creativity is something that's hard to define, but one way psychologists have done it is with this thing called the remote associates task. Here you're trying to think of words that have some common theme, or other creativity tasks involve generating novel uses, like what can you do with a sock, right? And some people might say put it on your foot, and others might say you could use it as a weapon. You could use it for all kinds of. Anyway, so on these kind of artificial creativity tasks, it seems that after spending, in this case, like a weekend in nature, people do better than if you get them before that weekend in nature. There are some classic studies that have looked at patients in the hospital, that if you have a view out the window of some trees and some natural space, that you recover more quickly, you request less pain medication if you have a brick wall there. There was a nice study in the last couple years done in Toronto. Toronto has some good records of the urban trees, and don't have the exact statistic at hand, but it's something like if there are 11 more trees on your city block in Toronto, it's equivalent to being like 1.4 years younger in terms of your subjective health, your sense of your cardiovascular health. And then the maybe hardest thing to argue with, mortality. There's some studies in the UK that find that, again, this is more where you live, but if you live next to green space, you actually live longer. And this is especially true for low socioeconomic status people. So we know that rich and educated people tend to live longer or tend to be have better health, but nature seems to close that gap. So poorer, less educated people do better if they live close to nature, close to green space in the city. So far we've been talking about reasons why it will be good for you to have nature in your life, health and happiness, but you should also want the people you have to interact with to be near nature too. It seems like there are these community or these pro-social correlates of nature. So one example, these are studies done in Chicago, and what's nice about them, they happen in public housing. So people are not quite, but essentially randomly assigned to the place where they live. So that's good for the social science. You're in Chicago. Some of these housing projects have a few trees outside, nothing spectacular. This is very urban nature. And some of them just have nothing. They're bleak. They're just urban spaces, all concrete and buildings. You find that people self-report less aggression when there's some of this green space, and that shows up also in the police records. So around those areas, there's less crime. Different projects, but also in Chicago, they looked at do you know your neighbors? How much time do people spend in community spaces? And again, if there was some, not a lot, but some nature at the housing project, people knew their neighbors, they were outside, so it seems to increase the social activity, the socializing. There are some lab studies where they just like put plants in the room, or they take plants out of the room as an experimental manipulation, and then they say, you're in charge, you have $10 to allocate, you can give it all to yourself, you can give some to other people. When there are plants in the room, people behave more generously, they give more of that money to the other person. Findings like this got us thinking. It seems that people are pro-social, they might be more cooperative, and that this actually underlies a lot of our environmental challenges or sustainability. And the thinking here is that if I would do something nice for the environment all on my own, it doesn't really help very much. I kind of need other people to be on board. Nature might be one of the things that helps nudge us towards this cooperative behavior, this pro-social behavior, that this could help with sustainability too. And so we've done some studies that I guess intentionally kind of muddle, is this cooperation or is this a pro-environmental behavior, to kind of demonstrate that link. But what we do, we bring people into the lab, and then we randomly assign them to watch a video that's an architectural tour of New York City, or it's, in this case, BBC Planet Earth, a nice nature documentary for about 10 minutes. And then they participate in this fishing simulation on the computer. And so the way this works, we pay people 10 cents for every fish that they catch. So you're making money by catching fish. And you're, yeah. You're also doing this with other people. In most of the studies, the computer simulates those other people. And then the final feature is that, just like in the real world, the fish can regenerate themselves. So you catch some fish, we say it's a new season, they spawn, and based on how many fish are left in the lake, we add fish back in. So it's possible to the fish to sustainably harvest and just keep slowly accumulating income. But if you don't trust the other people, or you just want to get out of the experiment quickly, you can just catch all the fish. They're all gone, they're extinct, but you have a big pile of money at the beginning. Okay. So it's this trade-off. What we find is that when we show people the video of New York City, they take more fish in each of the seasons compared to the BBC Planet Earth. So that suggests maybe they're overfishing, maybe they're not. They're harvesting more. But the second graph over here, we look at how many seasons are there still fish left in the lake. And if you've watched the New York City video, it is fewer. I think in this study we cut them off at 15. So if you watch Planet Earth, most of those oceans are intact. Fish have not gone extinct, but a substantial number have gone extinct if you watched New York City. So again, I'm not saying like one nature documentary changes people's lives, but it might be this context. It might nudge people's judgment or decision making in more cooperative or more sustainable ways. We were recently able to test some of these ideas out with kids. We got a small grant to take grade 4, 5, and 6 students on 2 field trips. But one day we took them to a forest school on the west end of Ottawa. It says school, but basically they just got to go out there and play in the woods, build forts, run around and discover. And these were kids from a normal urban school. Many of them seemed, at least anecdotally, were kind of nature deprived, but this was a pretty novel experience for them. The other day, we took them to the Space and Aviation Museum in Ottawa. So it's still an interesting, fun place, but completely built. They're not outside of nature. And we found on these 2 different field trips some differences. So at the forest school, in nature, the kids reported more positive emotions, but this is not the typical finding. In this case, they also reported more negative emotions too. So it just seemed to be a more intense experience. Some of them got their boots wet. It was a little bit cold, so It's not always more pleasant in nature. Spending the day in nature, though, they did report more of an emotional connection with nature. That's something I'm going to talk more about in just a minute. They reported more interest in protecting nature after having just spent some time there. We asked them to imagine they had $100 they just came into, they could do with it, they could allocate it across different categories, like keeping it, buying nice things for themselves, giving some to charity, gifts for other people. So after the day in nature, they were more likely to allocate that money or more of that money to charity. And finally was another one of these tasks to try to get at pro-sociality, where essentially, it's kind of complicated in the details, they could choose a task for another student that was easy or that was difficult, and if that other student accomplished the task, that student would get a prize. So if you give an easy task to somebody, you're essentially saying this person will get a prize. If you give them a hard one, they probably won't. And we found that after the day in nature, they made this kind choice. They gave more easy tasks to their fellow students. Okay, so to this point, I've been talking about actually being in nature, so a physical connection with natural spaces. But what I want to transition to now is a sense of connection with nature, a subjective sense of connection with nature. So sometimes, or for some people, even when you're not physically in nature, you can still understand yourself as connected to nature, that you're part of an ecosystem, that nature is important to you, and this is kind of in opposition to the idea where some people, I think, feel completely disconnected from nature, and it's gross, and it's other, and we're civilized people who live in houses that are not nature. So maybe you can keep this sense of connection to nature in your mind. This is actually where the research started for me. When a student came to me with this idea of nature and happiness, and she developed this nature relatedness questionnaire. So we think of this as an individual difference. Some people are more connected to nature, are higher in nature relatedness than others. And it has to do with both their emotional connection, how they understand themselves as part of nature, broader ecosystems, and also nature-related people do spend more time in nature, so do they get out there and experience nature? You could think of it, I guess in more theoretical terms, as like your biophilia, this innate need to search out and connect with living or lifelike parts of nature, that this is supported and fulfilled. Some sample items from this questionnaire: I feel connected to all living things in the earth. I take notice of wildlife wherever I am. Or this one you disagree with: animals, birds, and plants should have fewer rights than humans. So there are about 20 items that collectively we use as an indicator of if you're connected with nature. Here's a single item measure, though, that does a similar thing. This is actually adapted from psychology researchers who study close interpersonal relationships. And so you use this metaphor of like myself and perhaps my spouse. Are we two separate things? Or you can choose varying levels of overlap to indicate a connection or intimacy. So you just call one of these circles yourself, the other one nature. And I think conceptually this kind of helps us see what it is. And sometimes we use this measure when we want to know, right now at this moment, how connected to nature do you feel? This metaphorical abstraction seems to work well for that. So what are nature-related people like? Well, unsurprisingly, they spend more time outdoors and in nature, and not just that they self-report this once. We use this experience sampling method, similar to that smartphone study, where we ask people many times, what are you doing now? What are you doing now? What are you doing now? And that's the way we think we're getting a more objective and accurate measure of just, I'm in nature a lot. It's averaged over their actual moments. People high in nature relatedness are more likely to spend time in their yard or in a park. This particular paper I have in mind looked at, do you live close to these places, or are you high in nature relatedness? And it turned out that nature relatedness predicted if you actually go to the park, even if you live next door, you're not connected with nature, you kind of avoid it. People high in nature relatedness are more likely to participate in environmental organizations. They're more likely to report engaging in sustainable behaviors and making sustainable purchases. There are standard measures of pro-environmental attitudes, and nature-relatedness correlates highly with those, this idea that we should do something about the planet, it's in trouble, it's important. But interestingly, when we compare these standard environmental attitudes with nature-relatedness, we find that nature-relatedness seems to add a little something. So statistically, when you put them in the equation together, nature-relatedness is predicting over and above. It seems like having that sense of connection, you feel it more deeply, you're more likely to follow through with the actual behaviors. That I think is the way I understand that. We've also found that who is nature-related, having grown up in a rural area or recalling a lot of experiences in nature as a kid, or having parents who are interested in nature, seems to, it's, oftentimes we're relying on memory here, but seems to be perhaps some of the basis of where this comes from in people. But I mean, I think it can be developed as an adult too. So your subjective sense of connection with nature, high nature-relatedness, is also associated with well-being, with happiness. So these high energy, positive emotions, a sense of curiosity, of being fascinated, a sense of awe, like nature is a great eliciter of awe. So this is consistent with that. But also these low energy positive emotions, the sense of relaxation and serenity. So depending on the time or the context, nature-related people have both the high energy and the low energy positive emotions. They also report more satisfaction with their life. There's an example item: in most ways, my life is close to my ideal. If we look at well-being, kind of positive mental health a bit more broadly, we found some associations with the sense of nature-relatedness. So having a sense of personal growth that you're continuing to develop in positive ways. Having this sense of autonomy, of authenticity, that you're doing what's important and valued to you as opposed to just what other people want you to do. Having a sense of purpose, meaning, direction in life. These seem to go along with nature-relatedness. Similar to the idea that moments in nature might nudge people towards pro-social or cooperative choices, we find that people who are more connected to nature also self-report these kinds of things. So nature-related people tend to score higher in humanitarianism. A person should always be concerned about the well-being of others. Social value orientation. This is it's a self-report measure, but the way it works is you allocate points to yourself and to other people, and you get all these different combinations, and you can do this in a way that's equitable or even generous, or you can do it in a way where I get like the most points, or I really try to maximize the difference. Like I'll even take fewer points if I can screw you over more and give you 0. So there's a thought of as a generosity or equality. Nature-related people tend to be nicer on a task like this. We've also looked at, and this is a little surprising to me at first, we've looked at people's social connections, and I guess I kind of wondered at first, maybe there are some people out there who just like feel connected to everything. Like they feel connected to their ethnic group, they feel connected to their family, their friends, they feel connected to their university community, they have strong attachments, but we found pretty much no. So like to a surprising degree, people's sense of connection with nature is just not correlated one way or the other with their attachment to other people and their identification with various social groups. We know that people who feel socially connected tend to be happier, but this is helpful then in that if you take those social connections and nature-relatedness, they again both kind of independently predict well-being and happiness. So even if you're a socially connected person, adding some nature-relatedness might still be good for the happiness. So with all these desirable correlates of nature-relatedness, we've wondered if we can increase it. And this is an area where I would love to learn more about how we can do this or how we can do this better. So if you have ideas, by all means, please share them. We have a few hints, though, that are suggested. So how should we predict nature-relatedness? Well, first and perhaps obviously, in the short term, if I just want to know, do you feel connected to nature in the moment, and using those circles and the amount of overlap, we find that we can increase that pretty dramatically, and it's not too hard. So if we just take people out into nearby nature, they feel more connected to nature. And we can boost that up even more if we give them a mindfulness set of instructions. Like feel the wind, take in the experience, be in the moment, try to take it all in rather than having your thoughts wander to other things. That increases their sense of connection to nature when they're outside in nearby nature. But I think what we're really interested in, though, is a longer-term change in developing this as a personality characteristic. And here again, some hints. I don't know, some of you may have heard of the Suzuki Foundation. They have this 30 by 30 challenge where they get people to commit to spending 30 minutes in nature every day for a month, for 30 days. We've been able to track these people over time. So again, not the best study. These are self-selected people. They found themselves on David Suzuki's webpage, so they start out like very nature-related to begin with. But even over the course of this 1 month, committing to spend, for many of them, what's more time in nature, their nature-relatedness increases a bit, their happiness increases a bit, and they also have more concern for the environment over this period of time. Again, no control condition. We looked at Carlton at students in different classes. So again, we couldn't randomly assign them, but we can get a comparison group. So we looked at students who were in natural history classes or geography classes where students were learning about the local natural environment. And we compared it over the course of a semester to students who were in psychology classes or English classes and who weren't taking these kinds of classes. We did this over the fall term. And actually what we found is everybody's nature-relatedness decreased during this time. Their stress increased, their happiness went down. But the people who were in these natural history, these biology classes, it seemed to be a buffer. So they actually stayed about the same in nature-relatedness, their vitality, their sustainability, whereas everybody else was decreasing. So it seems at least like a relative change in the right direction. But again, not the strongest evidence. There are, Holly-Ann Pesmer, she's been working out in British Columbia, has done some nature intervention experiments that I think are promising. She has people, for over the course of a couple weeks, take photographs of nature that kinds of strike them. So your task is to find something that's emotionally evocative in nearby nature in your day-to-day life. Take a picture of it and kind of savor it and think about it. Some people do that, and then she's compared it to people who've done that for built environments or just kind of waiting list controls, people who aren't doing that. And she finds over the course of these 2 weeks that doing this seems to increase emotional well-being, seems to increase happiness, a sense of connection, both with nature, but even like life, the universe, and everything. So it seems to like broadly make them feel connected to things. And also some of these pro-social orientations, like that measure of social value orientation. So here, nature over the course of a couple of weeks seems to be doing these things, all of these things together. So that, I think, is promising. This one I'm not sure I'm recommending, but there was an interesting study that came out a couple years ago where they got some people who were very depressed, and the other treatments weren't working, and they gave them magic mushrooms, in essence. And then they followed them over time. They found that, this is a very small study, only 7 people got the mushrooms, and then compared to a control group. But they found even 12 months later, their nature-relatedness was higher than before they had taken them. And so here's just a quote from somebody, one of the patients, before I enjoyed nature, now I feel part of it. Before I was looking at it as a thing, like a TV or a painting, but now I see there's no separation or distinction. You are it.
Is that during or after?
Yeah, no, exactly. This was after, but it does kind of connote. Yeah, we don't have any specific plans to look at cannabis, but now that it's legal in Canada, I mean, one could speculate it might make you, at least in the moment, feel connected. I don't want to babysit people while they're high, though, so I don't know the studies are coming. With that this is kind of, just to kind of wrap up, this is the same as the slide at the beginning. It seems like nature and feeling connected to nature is associated with well-being and some of these pro-social outcomes. So maybe nature could provide a happy path to happier and more sustainable communities. I try to encourage people to get some more nature. I think we could use nature to people's benefit, but it is possible to screw this up. So Boo-Boo here is very cute. This is actually my alma mater where I got my PhD, but after I had left, they brought in this bear to help with exam stress, and then it bit people, and they thought it had rabies. It didn't, and I think, Bobo or Boo-Boo was up for execution. I think was spared at the last minute when the tests came back negative. But so, I mean, you can do this wrong. Other things, I don't know. I think the main point is the bottom one. You know what to do in your day-to-day life. But there are lots of ways that people, even people who live in urban spaces, can do more to connect with nature in their day-to-day life. Just get out there, exercise, take some photos or draw or paint. Learn just to identify like some backyard birds, take an interest, you're lucky. In the winter, we have skating and skiing. Lots of ways one can do this. So I think I will leave it there. Feel happy planet. Thank yous. And this is probably hard to see, but maybe if you're watching the video. Here are some, these articles are all open access, so you don't have to have a university subscription to get them. Some helpful web pages. So anyway, I'm going to leave it there. I'd love to hear your questions, but thank you. Actually, we have time for questions. I haven't been keeping an eye on that at all.
Yes, we have time for questions, of course. Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
So I imagine we have a few questions, from our happy crowd. Yeah.
So, according to your presentation, happiness would be a desirable outcome, also health and well-being. So that's the solution. But now, how do you appeal to, say, the real estate agency or like the security agency or like the medical field? You get people being more healthy, you have less need for doctors.
Right.
You have people healthier, not violent crime. That's going to reduce need for security. So how do you appeal to them who see this as actually a problem because they want a problem?
Wow, that's a hard problem. I mean, I think you're right. In some of those cases, though, I mean, I always find it odd that like when the electricity utility sends me information how to reduce the electricity I use. But I think that oftentimes the people that work in these fields do have an interest in reducing it. Reducing crime, reducing medical visits, even if it means slightly less work for them. Though I think there might be examples where you're right, and then that's potentially a struggle.
Here.
Yeah.
Madame.
I
Yeah.
It's super interesting, your talk. Have you considered the difference in economic capacity of different people in the relationship with nature? Because, for example, if you have all your basic stuff covered, and you go outside, you can feel connected with the nature and really. But if you don't have a job, you are in a poor community, and if you come from a poor country, the nature is beautiful, but I need.
You would rather be out of it.
And I have 3 kids. So what kind of influence the connection with nature?
Yeah, you raise a good question. So with the kinds of people we've studied, we don't find much link between people's sense of connection with nature and their socioeconomic status. But these are people in North America who have logged onto a computer to complete our surveys. And certainly anecdotally, if you are living on the beach in India and subsistence fishing, I think you would very much like to connect with nature less. Right. So I mean, on the other hand, if they locked you in a high rise with no window, that might be a different kind of problem too. So, but you're absolutely right. I think there is kind of a middle ground where we want to feel safe and protected and not experiencing nature as a threat, and we want to have nature that is not too polluted, that is healthy, that is green. So I think the potential of nature to be health-giving is pretty universal. But the idea that everybody should spend more time in nature is maybe not the answer if you don't have a house to live in.
In the back. The professor at Adelaide.
So you talked about taking photos as a way that you can sort of achieve this like nature connectedness, but in the wake of social media and all of the like tagging of photos and getting likes and all that stuff, how do you see that like social media as sort of a negative impact on people's happiness? Being contrasted.
Yes.
Or how it changes the perception of nature.
That's a great question. Psychologists are really, and other social scientists, in a debate right now about if smartphones are ruining us or not. I think like the more alarmist, or the ones who are saying it's really horrible, is probably too extreme. There has been some research on taking photos, and to kind of test this notion that if you're going around, we've all seen this person on vacation, like you're taking photos of everything, like why don't you just experience where you are? Which can be true. So if it's just kind of no thought and like just looking through the lens the whole time, that's bad. But the majority of the time, if you're kind of putting some thought into it, if you're composing, if you're finding a unique and new element with the photography, this actually seems to enhance the experience. So people who study savoring positive emotional experiences will often recommend photos. So I think it comes down to like, how do you do it? This idea that could you use apps as a way to get people into nature, there are some people who started studying this, and the results are, they're not dramatically great, like give a person the app that tells them to go into nature. I want to see them as being helpful. The results are maybe encouraging, but they're not transformative, but it also doesn't seem like it's ruining people's ability to connect with nature. So I feel like it's the kind of thing you could do bad or poorly, and we're trying to figure that out still.
Let's go class.
Yeah, when you say nature, that's a big thing.
Oh gosh, yeah.
So I'm just wondering, if you remember Simon Sharma's book, Landscape of Memories, is it a certain part of nature? So like, if you show them dead trees or maybe worse yet, dead animals, after a fire or something like that, would you get just the opposite, that they want some familiarity, comfort, and that's what they're really after, because we can manipulate it in the recreational setting specifically to get certain impressions and visual experiences. But how do you deal with the different aspects of nature? How do they come into play?
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right that you can find examples of nature that will do the exact opposite. And we've assembled, a series of photos that are like clear cuts and oil spills and pollution. People feel horrible when you show them that. And we've assembled built environments that's like the Taj Mahal, gorgeous architecture. And so, we have data where the nature looks bad and the built environment looks good. But if you kind of sample the typical thing, the nature tends to be good more often than bad in most places. So it's like the green, the lifelike. When it gets into the details of, we were talking about this a little bit earlier, are some kinds of trees better? Is water better? Are beaches better? Are there certain kinds of biomes that are better for people? There have been some suggestions, but I don't think we have a clear answer on that's robust at this point.
What about the comparison between like an urban park and a forest?
Yeah.
That's the degree of nature there is really different.
Completely, yeah. We need more studies on this, but the ones I know about have kind of gone in two directions, and it might depend on who you are. That you can come up with like a dense forest that people find frightening, and in that case, a park by comparison is seen as nice, and more people are on board for, oh yeah, a park looks good, we'll feel safe, and this will be restorative. Anecdotally, I talk to my colleagues who live in rural areas, and the park is not nature we're talking about. So some of these things may depend actually on your construal, so your subjective sense of is this nature or not, or is this threatening, or I enjoy camping, I enjoy being in the backwoods, and I know how to handle myself.
Yeah. There was a question at the back.
It was about why.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I can follow up one, this isn't the most important thing, but one study I've been involved with, about a handful of studies, another idea in this is that people might do better the biomes that are familiar to them. So we actually compared people in Ottawa to people in Florida. We found everybody likes the beach, but people in Florida really like the beach, and people in Ottawa much prefer a temperate forest compared to people in Florida. And so, you'd want more comparisons, but it seems like there's something to this familiarity, to this subjective experience. It's not just the objective biome.
Yeah.
Could you speak a little bit louder?
Sorry, in a continuation of that, what about desert environments?
Yeah.
Like Monuments Valley or Death Valley National Park or Great Big Mountains, like if you compare the extremes of the natural.
Yeah, a great question. So what about deserts or extremes or mountains? Deserts I haven't studied, and on one hand, they're a tricky one, right? Though if you take biophilia very literally, it's like hard to see them as lifelike. But like Monument Valley, like you look at that and it's just awesome. So I would think that would be what people have used things like this as a prototypical inducer of awe. But then again, you can have awe and fear at the same time too. So I'm just stalling. I don't know. We have looked at mountains, and mountains seem to be one of these things that if you are close to mountains, you like them more. If you've grown up near mountains, you like them more than if you haven't.
Let's go here. Let's go, Florian.
A little question about biophilia hypothesis and how it is related to evolutionary psychology, because it seems quite the same, but really having the same ideas. And how can you, if it is the same problem with evolutionary psychology, and how you can really be sure some instincts, some reaction can have been selected evolutionary with only one species or maybe 2, 3 closely, but not so related to us. It is really sure.
Yeah. So I think what you're saying, evolution is pretty complicated, and where dolphins evolved to live in the ocean, that would not be good for us, right?
In fact, in evolutionary biology, we have a great number of species we can use, but if we are using the psychology with some aspects of human which are not really found in other species, the other species related to us is chimpanzees, bonobo, or other, but which are not really that similar in terms of culture. How can you really say this behavior of humankind is directly related to evolutionary biology and not only culture or...
I see what you're saying. Yeah, I agree that making the evolutionary claim is risky business, and the evidence for it is very circumstantial. So I even with biophilia, I don't think we would want to say that culture doesn't make a big difference as to what counts as nature and how we understand nature. Even in the biophilia book, Wilson does kind of go through instances of nature that get brought into culture, like why are snakes associated with religion so much, and there is the way we think about nature gets wrapped up in culture. But yeah, I think everybody, when we ask the question, why in psychology, ultimately we kind of go back to evolution must have something to do with it, but testing the details of that is pretty fraught. And among psychologists, somewhat controversial as to how much they will say, well, you can deduce theoretically a risky prediction and test it, versus are you just told stories once you found some difference. It's fraught, I agree. Yeah.
Do we have maybe 1 or 2 short questions in the back?
You said there is more information to process in the city and less in nature. And I was wondering, how do you determine that? How do you quantify that?
Yeah.
Complexity.
It's a good question. For the most part, within that theoretical framework, it is logical persuasion and intuition, and the idea being that and maybe I said it poorly. It's I don't think people would say that nature is less complex, but there are less demands, less things that grab your attention in a hard way, like buses and text and language. But I think the other side can be true too. The people who study the visual features of urban and nature landscapes, you feed it into a computer and you have it dissect like the straight lines and the hues and the visual complexity. And that way nature is more complex when you try to quantify it. And people like nature, people like simple urban environments, but they like complex nature environments. But I would say in this theory, it's about what grabs your attention in a way that you can't look away, or it's hard to look away.
It's more like stimulus, also like visual and audio.
Yeah, the kind of the amount or the intensity of the stimulation.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
You had a question, or?
Well, if you haven't been leave it, I can ask that.
Okay. Okay, so it's...
I just want to be contrarian. Because
please.
Of course.
That's usually my point.
There is a movement, people want to move in the city away from the countryside.
Yes, absolutely, yeah.
And according to what you said, they want to go from being happy to less happy.
Yeah.
And the other thing that I find contrarian is, and that's a bit more controversial, but when we look at politics, those in the countryside are more right-wing, less accepting of diversity, more caring about maybe, and yet they live in nature. So how do you reconcile? And then in the city, people seem to be more tolerant, more social oriented, more willing to fight for the good of everybody. So there seems to be a contradiction. And I was trying to explain that, and I'm not sure how we can.
Yeah. I mean, I think there might be a couple contradictions, and some of them might be easier than the others. Like, it's true that people are moving into cities. Why would they do this if they can't be happy? I don't know if this will be helpful or not. Here's another similar paradox, though. Religion is correlated with happiness, yet people are leaving religion like really quickly. And with that, it seems like people are leaving or becoming less religious in economically developed, highly educated, like these places you're thinking of where the circumstances are very good. And you find then that religion is not a very good predictor in those places. Religion is a better predictor of happiness in really difficult circumstances. And so I think, part of the reason why people move to cities is for wealth and education and opportunity. And they'd be willing to trade some of the natural beauty and pleasantness that comes with that. And it's not as if nature is the only thing that makes people happy. Like living next to a good museum and good restaurants and earning more money is good for the happiness as well. So I suspect that's the trade-offs people are making. I feel like there was another half that I've kind of forgotten now.
People in the countryside tend to be more on the right side of the political.
Yeah, there's some evidence actually to suggest that that people who are more conservative politically are a bit happier. Too. So and this on average, it's I'm not advocating one of many things.
Trump is very, very happy.
Yeah, I don't know about that. Yeah.
So nature makes you vote more conservative.
Actually, this would be an interesting thing to do. I speculate that it would be less. If we look at broad personality dispositions, this openness to experience, which tends to be associated with liberalism, is one of the better predictors of nature relatedness. So I mean, I wonder if it's kind of an accident of nature is like where traditional things are, where you do know your neighbors. These are things that do contribute to happiness. Some people have speculated that this is a little bit more controversial, that maybe conservatives are less sensitive to inequality, so you don't, when you go to the city and you see people who have less than you, it bothers you. Conservatives, the world is fair, they get what they deserve. You can be happy then in the face of that, but Yeah, these are contentious issues, as you imagine. It could be interesting though. So I could imagine, 100 years from now, maybe there will be kind of a reversal, and if urban people start moving back to nature, and they're the educated, open-minded people, they might be getting that happiness boost of nature. Might be kind of social forces that are working against one another. These are good paradoxes.
Very, very last question.
I was just going to say, maybe it's more like moving from naturally created happiness to socially constructed happiness. It's a different way to define it.
Yeah, I mean, this idea that, there are multiple paths to happiness, and happiness researchers debate, are there different kinds of happiness? Which is the frauds too. But it makes sense. That makes sense to me.
So thanks a lot, John.
It's a great pleasure.
Thanks a lot. Pour les étudiants qui sont dans le cours, on va se rejoindre ici à peu près à 2h.